I don't want to spend a lot of time on this private investigator, but that is fascinating and hilarious. That's a lot to unpack if that was his golden age. That's all I have to say.
Yeah, that does raise a lot of questions.
That's a lot. There's a lot.
Hello, and welcome to May the Review Be With You with Nick and Joe. I'm Joe.
I'm Nick.
And today, Nick, I am so excited. It is time for us to return to our time travel draft series. Baby,
Finally.
We're back, Nick. We're back.
Finally.
We've gone through a few of these films, but we kind of took a pause over the summer.
Yeah, big summer break for the time travel draft because summer releases for TV and movies are pretty huge. So we were super busy with that. Of course, Acolyte, House of the Dragon, The Bear, Deadpool and Wolverine, which is just a massive film. And yeah, now the summer's over and we've got a little bit more downtime with main releases. We do have Rings of Power coming out, but that's a weekly release. So we'll be on Threads a lot more talking about that rather than on YouTube and podcasts. And so we get to finally get back to our time travel draft. And what a better, not a better place to pick up than your beloved Midnight in Paris. I'll let you take away the intro here.
And thank you. I'm so excited to go over this film for a lot of reasons. This has just always been a fun film that I think it's always been in my top 10 favorite films of all time. Midnight in Paris. I'm a sucker for time travel films, which of course that's why we're talking about it today. But also B, it's just a really fun Owen Wilson romantic comedy, right? And actually, it's because of this movie that we even started time travel draft, if you recall correctly.
Yeah.
There was a conversation Nick and I had sometime last year where we were talking about season 2 of Loki, and just randomly brought up to Nick. It was like, yeah, this isn't even the first time that Owen Wilson and Tom Hiddleston have been in a time travel thing together. And I think at the time you didn't know what I was talking about, right?
I had no clue. I was like, well, what's the name of this movie you're talking? I have no idea. And then you dropped Midnight in Paris. I'm like, I've never seen this film. And then I watched it, and I was just blown away that one, was pissed I'd never seen it. And two, like, I also love time travel movies. So I was double pissed because it also was a time travel movie I had not seen. Fantastic. Stoked to talk about.
Yeah, and it was kind of through the conversation that we had after you watched it, where we kind of found this, like, we both shared this love for time travel movies, and time travel draft was kind of born out of that.
Yeah. Which was
yeah, so this is for the time travel draft. I drafted this one.
Yes, you did.
For time travel comedy. And do I have that right? Time travel comedy, right? Yeah, because I did romance for Groundhog Day.
Yep.
Which was very smart of me.
And my comedy film was Endgame, Avengers Endgame, because clearly it is a comedy. I will die on that hill.
Yeah, no, I agreed. 2/3 was a comedy.
Yeah. We're not going to talk about the ending. And plus, now, technically, Tony Stark's not dead because he's Doctor Doom now. So, anyway.
Okay, so we just want to open that can of worms
immediately? We do not want to do that. We're not doing that today. That's not what this episode is about.
Yeah, let's save that for a different show. All right. So,
you're stalling.
Time travel.
It's time.
It's time. Yep,
it's time.
I was going to bring it up. I was going to bring it up.
I didn't forget. Unfortunately, you get to do...
time. Nick, take it away.
So, before every single conversation, when we review a movie, we take turns in doing a 15-second summary of that film. Joe has the pleasure of giving us a 15-second summary of Midnight in Paris. And so, without further ado, Joe, you have 15 seconds to review Midnight in Paris. 3.
Bring it.
2, 1, go.
A Francophile in the year 2010 who loves the 1920s accidentally finds himself in Paris 1920, where he meets famous artists and psychologists and writers, and discovers that 2010s are better. I forgot.
You didn't even, honestly, you didn't even finish the plot.
I forgot that there is a subtle art to the 15-second summary. We've been out of practice for a minute, you know?
That was pretty bad. I'm actually shocked at how bad that was. Based on
It
how
was
much
far
you
from my
love,
grasp.
based on how much you love this movie, I'm shocked at how terrible that was. That was really bad.
You know what it is? I feel like the more you love the movie, actually, the harder the 15-second summary is.
You put more pressure on yourself because you're like, I know this. I don't even need to read about it. I'm good. You were not good.
Well,
you were not
it's
good
almost
at all.
like there's so much you want to put in the 15-second summary, and then it's like constipation, and you can't.
Yep.
Just nothing comes out.
Speaking of constipation, you got a C-. In this
I was
case,
waiting for that. Yeah, no, that feels appropriate. Like I did enough to prove that like I was aware of the assignment.
yeah, you were aware.
I was aware.
That's a good statement. All right, C-, decent.
I'll take it. So for how the rest of this is going to go,
Yes.
Nick and I are going to talk about the film, of course, what we liked, what we didn't like, and then we're going to get into the whole premise of this draft, the time travel concept, which I'm excited to talk about that with you, Nick, because for this movie, it's never really something I've given a lot of thought about before. And after that, we will give our scores on the movie, which we'll get into that toward the end. That's a little bit different than what we normally score movies. So, Nick, let's talk about the movie. Would you like to give a better summary of what this movie is?
Yeah, I guess I could give it a shot. So essentially, we've got Owen Wilson and Rachel McAdams as characters are visiting Paris, and they are engaged to be married. They, Rachel McAdams and her family's character are horrible human beings, and Owen Wilson is a script writer, a Hollywood writer, and he's writing a book that he really wants to be good, but he's nervous about. Anyway, they're in Paris visiting, and Owen Wilson, what's his character's name, please?
Gil,
thank you. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, but they keep calling him Jill.
Yeah. Gil stumbles onto, he's walking through Paris in the middle of the night, towards midnight, and he somehow finds his way into the 1920s, which we'll get into that, and he meets all of these writers that are his heroes and befriends them, also falls in love with a woman from the 1920s, and essentially goes on this journey of self-discovery and like what it means to like live in the moment. And so eventually realizing that he loves Paris and wants to stay there. And, then his marriage falls apart because, well, one, they're horrible people. So this whole thing is like, it's a very, he spends a few days in Paris and essentially changes his whole entire life, which I'm sure is not necessarily realistic, but very awesome and charming. And he ends up time traveling during this to the 1920s. And that's kind of an overview, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, and then it turns into like a lesson learned toward the end, right?
Yep.
Not your typical boy meets girl, boy loses girl, boy gets girl again.
Nope.
Yeah, it's more of a discovery of I guess I don't know how else to describe it except where you might be pointing your love, like perhaps like redirecting it toward the present, right?
Yeah, that's great.
But I think that's a good way to sum up the movie. What you just did right there.
Awesome.
So I do want to reflect on one thing though, since we're getting into now the portion of this of things that we like and don't like. This might be the third or fourth time I've seen this movie, and I don't know if it's occurred to me before, but as you said this about Rachel McAdams' character Ines and her parents, they're really awful people, or like right, like they're in this amazing city and like they just so unimpressed with everything, right? They seem like the typical like ugly American. And, I think that's an accurate impression of who they are. However, this is the first time watching this movie that I've ever watched and been like, Gil kind of sucks too. Like, Gil sucks. Like, everyone around Gil sucks more than Gil, but Gil is not that great either. Like there are a couple times in the beginning of the movie where, even before Ines's friend Paul becomes, like, very annoying, where Ines is clearly trying to talk to Gil, and Gil's like just off in his own little world. Like he's just busy like romanticizing the past. I mean, it's kind of his problem, right? Like the whole reason why the movie even takes place is because he can't appreciate what's in front of him. He can't appreciate the present. And well before Ines makes any kind of like mistake or wrongdoing by cheating on Gil, which, you know, is a revelation, at least for Gil at the end of the movie. He's not paying attention to her. Their first conversation is they're in Paris and he's talking about the rain and he's like waxing poetic about it, and Rachel is just like, oh, who would want to be wet? Like, she's just reacting to everything he's saying, and he just ignores her. He just keeps on going on the whole time. So yeah, Gil kind of sucks a little bit. Yeah, at least in the beginning.
And the beginning stands out to me a lot too for a number of reasons, and one of them is just that right away you know that they're not right for each other, and you just want them to break up because they're so horrible together. But the other thing that stands out that's even before that is it takes 4 minutes for the opening credits to finish.
Yeah.
And it's like a Woody Allen thing or something. Like,
oh, yeah, nailed that.
For 4 minutes, we're just getting beautiful French jazz background music and shots of Paris. And it's very sweet at first, and then you realize, oh my God, Woody Allen is just making me wait 4 minutes until the first characters like jump on screen. So that stood out to me on the rewatch.
So just to like comment on that further, like, you're right that like that is a Woody Allen thing, but I think there are a few filmmakers that he highlights in this movie, and I can't tell you if like he's referencing like any single one of them directly with that opening, but like he most certainly is like referencing like the French New Wave of things, right? And France was obviously a really big part of cinematic history. I think he wants to highlight Paris in particular, with like the beginning of this movie, to at least reference or acknowledge that, you know, the very roots of cinema, right?
Right. Yeah, it's great. It's a great call. So yeah, those are things that stood out to me. And of course, other things that I really liked were just the cast of characters that we got. I mean, the 1920s, or the Roaring Twenties, as Gil will call it, is just unbelievable with the amount of artists and creativity that come out of Paris in this time frame. It's you watch the movie and you're like, there's no way that this all happened. All these people existed in this time, but it like did, most of them, and it's unbelievable to have the revelation while you're watching the movie. So that's really cool, and we can dig into that, of course. And
can we just dig into it right now?
Yeah, sure. Let's just go.
It's one of the funnest parts of this movie.
Yeah,
right?
It's so good.
I feel like before we got like Marvel cameos,
right,
of different superheroes jumping into each other's movies, it was this movie.
Right.
You know, like it feels like you're in this party and there are all these faces that, you know, you're not necessarily friends with, but like you recognize them and you get so excited about like, well, who else is at this party, right? And it's literally a party that he keeps meeting all of these people at. It's really cool. Of course, I'm sure you will probably agree. The standout to me is Corey Stoll as Ernest Hemingway. Just kind of steals the show wherever he is. Yeah,
that's a huge highlight. And Tom Hiddleston as Scott Fitzgerald, like
old sport.
Old sport. Just having him say old sport a million times, I'm like, well, I mean, Leo crushed The Great Gatsby, but come on. I mean, this would have been a great casting as well. It was awesome. And yeah, just so cool. We got Pablo Picasso. We got Dali. I mean, just the cast. Skirkenstein. The just the amount of like cameos, you know, of real life cameos is really what they are in this kind of sense. It is fantastic and really fun. And just such a cool way to explore the 1920s in Paris in a time travel movie. You know, I mean, because Gil's reaction when he realizes what's happening is complete disbelief and excitement. You know, for someone who's a writer to be able to experience this time frame of history is like really fun.
I do love, like, it actually does take him some time to recognize what's actually happening, right? Like he doesn't get it right away, and there's something that feels really very realistic about that, especially with like, was it Cole Porter? That like he keeps hearing him play, and I think he turns to Zelda at one point, and like he doesn't say this exactly, but it's the same idea of like, you're fucking with me, right? Like,
like he didn't write that.
Like none of this is real.
He's not the writer of this. Like, we're not in the
Right.
we're not in the
That's the scene.
20s.
That's the
Yeah,
scene.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
Well, he
so
didn't
fun.
write it.
Yeah.
Both looking at him like he's insane.
So good.
It's just like you said. It's just super fun. I think it's one of the conversations that I absolutely adore is the dinner with surrealists when he being Gil, he's found Dali, who won't stop talking about rhinoceroses. And they're joined by Man and Bunel, who are both photographers and filmmakers, and they sit with Gil, and Gil says, all right, like, this isn't going to make any sense, but, like, I am sliding through time, and I'm in love with this other woman, and I think it's Man Ray that's like, yeah, you're sliding through time, like, what's weird about that? Like, totally on board with it, which, for the surrealist, double thumbs up. I loved this joke. Just the whole dinner itself is, or I guess they're just grabbing a drink. The drink itself is just funny, especially with Dali just not.
Mm-hmm.
He won't stop obsessing about rhinoceroses. Which I guess this shows like my art history. Like I didn't know that was a thing for Dali.
Yeah,
the melting for sure, but not the rhinoceri.
Yeah, I was not aware of that either. So quite a funny thing to discover during this. One quick fun fact about the movie that I wanted to just, because we talked about Woody Allen. Best Original Screenplay. Won an Oscar for Best Original Screenplay in 2012.
That's right.
Like, awesome. You know?
It deserves it.
Definitely deserved some love there. Ton of other nominations, of course, but that was really a fun little fact that I enjoyed reading.
Was one of the nominations for Best Cinematography?
I believe so. But you know what? I'm not 100% sure there. I know what Best Picture was one of them.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize that. You know what? I'm glad to hear that. I don't remember what it would have been competing with in 2010, but I'm very glad to hear that. This is, as I've mentioned before, it's close to my heart. I enjoy this film.
Okay, so Best Picture, Best Director nominations. It doesn't look like cinematography, actually. Best Product Design nominee, but yeah, won a Best Original Screenplay, and that was 2012. So, anyway,
I could definitely believe that. I mean, as far as it not necessarily getting Best Cinematography, but I think because there's nothing very experimental about like a lot of the camera work, but Paris itself just looks so freaking good in all those shots.
It does. They did a good job for sure.
Yeah. And they're right. It looks amazing in the rain. It's to the point where, like, on my list of cities, like, Paris is, like, high up there. And it's because of this movie.
Yeah.
You know?
Absolutely. Totally agreed. All right. Anything else you liked or didn't like before we get into time travel?
I love when Hemingway says she was an absolute volcano in the sack. Love that line.
I thought you were going to do a monologue on you're a writer, be a writer.
Be a writer. He has so many. He has so many great
ones. So
many
lines. Yeah.
I wrote one of them, which was no subject is terrible if the story is true, if the prose is clean and honest, and if it affirms courage and grace under pressure. Beautiful. Love that.
And then there's the line.
He's got so many good ones.
What's the other one? It's it doesn't matter if it's good. If it's good, I'll hate it, and if it's bad, I'll hate it. I'll hate it the more, or something like.
If it's bad writing, I'll hate it. If it's good, then I'll be envious and hate it all the more.
There it is.
You never want the opinion of another writer.
There you go. That's it.
Love that.
So good.
Yeah, excellent, no, he does. I mean, both Alan and Stahl like do such a great job of like bringing that particular character to life, but like so many of them, like just like they feel like they are jumping off the page. It's easy to see why this won Best Original Screenplay.
Yeah.
Just so much personality comes out of these people. Especially, I think it was Zelda. Mm-hmm. I forget the actress's name. We know her from Newsroom. What is her name?
Oh, that's where she's from. Newsroom. Hell yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, dog.
That's Alison Pill.
Alison Pill as Zelda.
Mm-hmm.
So much personality in that role. I think she absolutely kills it. Especially, I think it's in the beginning when she first meets Gil, and he's got like a faraway look in his eyes, and she's like, "You look stupefied, dumbfounded, lobotomized," like just rattling off like all these adjectives. Like,
she's really good.
So fun.
Another fun thing. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was just gonna say that this was not fun, but I appreciated it. Was bringing like the mental illness part of Zelda to life as well.
Yeah.
The whole contemplation of taking one's life and the way her skin crawls and stuff. Like, I'm glad they addressed that. I'm glad that was part of the character, and she did a great job with it.
Yeah, it's awesome. And then a fun little Easter egg: the museum guide towards the beginning that Gil also goes back to at some point halfway through the film. When Gil is with Inez and Paul, and Paul's being very he's telling the museum guide of the French museum guide like about French history and arguing with her even though she's the expert. That museum guide, played by Carla Bruni, first acting role was the former First Lady of France.
Whoa!
Yeah.
No way!
Yeah. First Lady of France back in 2008. She was married to Nicolas Sarkozy, which was the president for a while.
That makes him correcting her even funnier.
Yeah. That's what it does. It's like, dude, this is quite literally the First Lady of France. Not playing herself, but still.
Right.
Anyway.
Well, all the more hilarious. Yeah, that is great.
That was a fun little thing. And then, other than that, I think let's talk about time travel for a few minutes.
But before we do, let's take a quick commercial break. All right, and we're back. And like you said, Nick, let's talk about time travel.
All right.
So when the clock strikes midnight on a very particular road in Paris, Gil, or whoever is there, finds themselves, I guess, in a crossroads in space-time. I don't really know. The mechanics are not described. I think that there's a lot we can take from it.
Yeah.
But there's no hard mechanics in the movie.
Correct.
But at midnight, on that street, a car appears. He enters the car, and he is taken into class.
Oh, it's a car. It's a car.
When he wants... Yeah. At least at first. When he wants to go home, he can just go home, apparently.
Right.
No other mechanism is needed.
Right.
Okay. So I have my ideas about this, but I would love to hear what you think first.
So, very interesting. Just like you said, right? Car appears, 1920s car. At first, he gets in. People are telling him to come join them, and he just thinks it's like a late night, old school car. Then this is how he's transported, and then doesn't know that he's in the 1920s at first. Very subtle, very simple, very cool, very fun were my immediate thoughts. The movie doesn't try to explain time travel at all, and that's okay, because in this instance, it's we're exploring the 1920s and all the amazingness that happened, and we're not supposed to be thinking about how it actually works in this particular movie, right? It's supposed to be fun and simple, and it works great. The funniest part is how he gets back, right? Because there is no reason for how he gets back. It in the scenes where he is back in his present, it kind of just feels like the universe knows when his time is up and his particular trip is done, and when it's time for him to be back in his timeline, essentially. And so in that respect, it's kind of a fun toss-up, right? Because in different parts of the film, he's definitely spending different amounts of time in the 1920s. So it's not time sensitive necessarily for how long he's gone and how long it takes him to get back. He just gets back when it's the right time, basically. So I thought that was kind of, it's just cool, right? Time travel mechanic-wise, there's no explanations. So from a scoring perspective, you're going to do poorly. But from a movie perspective, it's fun. Those are my initial thoughts, at least, on the whole thing. And then, of course, it's really cool that really it seems like if you get into the car, if you don't get out of the car, you keep going further back in time. So at least that's implied later on in the movie when there's a private investigator following him, and then that private investigator ends up in like, I don't even know, ancient times, it seemed like. So that's also very unclear and complicates things a bit.
So I have my thought on that very specifically. But before we get to it, I agree with what you said. The time travel mechanic does not matter in this movie. There's a reason why it's not explained. It doesn't need to be bogged down by it. And truthfully, this is a story about people over-romanticizing the past, right? And not really appreciating the moment of the present, right? And what better way to explore that than literally taking people and transporting them into the past to see if they were right or wrong, right? So, yeah, absolutely agree. Mechanics don't matter really for this, but we're nerds and we're going to do this anyway. So as far as I see it, as far as this works, the movie does actually lay out, I think, some rules on how this particular time travel works, even though it doesn't explicitly state it. So first and foremost, you have to be on that road. Whatever road that is, you gotta be there, right? Number two, you have to be there at midnight. When the clock starts, chiming 12, that's when this magic wormhole portal opens, right? Number three, it appears you need some sort of vehicle, at least not when you're going to the past. You need to be in some sort of vehicle because you're not just on the road. A vehicle from the past appears, and then you get into the vehicle, and it takes you down, right? But like you said before, when you're going back to the present, apparently that doesn't matter. All logic is just out the window. No rules on going home. Last rule, and maybe it's the most important one. So, reiterate. Street, time, car. Last thing, I think you need a golden age of thinking, right? I think there needs to be a spot in time that you identify as like the golden age. So in the beginning of the movie, Paul, the guy that Ines is obsessed with, the pedantic gentleman, right? He says that nostalgia is denial, nostalgia is denial of the painful present. It's called the golden age of thinking, golden age thinking, right? This comes up again later in the movie when Gil and Adriana journey back into the 80s, which is specifically what Adriana identifies as the golden age. And she even says as much when Paul Gauguin says that the age of the Renaissance was way better. And she's like, no, that's crazy. This is the golden age. So very specifically, like we're dropping that language in two different spots. One spot to define Gil, and then Adriana identifies herself as such too.
Great call.
So I think you have to have that.
That's a great call.
Which leads us to the last person who time travels.
Right.
Detective Tisserand, who ends up in 18th century Versailles with, I want to say, if Euro history's serving me, I think that's King Louis XVI. I don't know. There's a lot of Louis.
There was a lot of Louis.
He ends up in Versailles, and he's trying not to get killed. He was there at midnight with a car on the road. I guess he ended up there because he had a golden age of thinking for 18th century Versailles. I don't know. That's the theory I'm rocking.
I don't want to spend a lot of time on this private investigator, but that is fascinating and hilarious. That's a lot to unpack if that was his golden age. That's all I have to say.
Yeah, that does raise a lot of questions.
There's a lot of questions.
How that could possibly be his golden age.
But I love that thought. I hadn't thought about that, about you need the golden age thinking, because there was something missing for me. I was like, oh, but what else is there? Has to be something else. And that makes a lot of sense based on Adriana and Gil traveling to the 1890s, because her golden age was the 1890s. And that's such a great point. I love that. And that's one of the best,
I'm convinced.
Best scenes too of the movie, when he realizes like, oh my God, I've been thinking about this all wrong. I need to be living in my moment, and my age is, my present is the golden age. I just don't realize it, kind of situation. So yeah.
Right. The whole idea of if the 1890s becomes your present, And at some point or another, it will become dull, and then there will be another golden age or another golden age. And you'll just be chasing the past.
Yeah.
I'm convinced that the conversation with Paul in the beginning of the movie, I think it's before he tells the former First Lady of Paris that she's incorrect. I think it's before that scene where he mentions that thing about the golden age of thinking. And, it stands out. That conversation circles back in two ways. One, the golden age of thinking when we hear Adriana talking about it later. But then, and I love this, and I think you will too, because we're both suckers for circular storytelling. He describes nostalgia as being denial of the painful present, right? Later in the film, when Gil gets his book back from Gertrude Stein, and remember, his book is about a man, it's him, right? It's a man who owns a nostalgia shop. She informs him that Hemingway loved the book, but she doesn't understand, or he doesn't understand, how the main character can't possibly see that his fiancée is cheating on him. To which Gil, it's revealed to him in this moment, oh my God, that's true. And I think he says, wait, what are you talking about? And Gertrude Stein says, well, the other character, the pedantic one. And he responds with this look in his eye, and she asks what's wrong, and he says, that's denial. And then it immediately cuts to the present, because now we are facing a painful present, a painful truth. He is no longer in denial about his situation. I loved that was like, the whole premise of the movie is what Paul is saying in the very beginning. It's very, very clever writing.
Excellent.
Love that.
I love it. Woody Allen, man. Woody Allen.
Controversial character, but can tell a story.
Yeah. Yeah, fantastic. That's a great explanation. I got nothing else after that.
Where does it, as far as the other time travel movies go, what did you think about this particular mechanism for time travel?
I love the simplicity of it. I think it probably ranks on the lower end, overall, because it's not you think time travel, you think high tech, or you think science, or you think something like this, sci-fi, which is awesome. You don't think getting into the kind of vehicle of the place you want to go to, and then so subtly just being there, and there's no you don't even know that it happened, right? And so the subtletiness of it is really fun. But as far as just my overall ranking, I think it's probably on the lower end for reasons of just loving the sci-fi-ness of some of the other time travel we've talked about. But I don't know. I do like simple stuff. The simplicity is really cool. It probably it's got some charm to it that probably gives it a little bit more on the appreciative factor, if you will.
I do think it's funny that we have in this draft reviewed the time travel mechanism from Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, which is literally a series based in magic, and somehow this movie had the most magical time travel we've seen so far. Even J.K. Rowling's there was a logic to it, at least to how it worked, not the why.
Yeah, that's such a great point. Yeah, the time travel in Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban works really well. We've had this conversation. Yeah. So JK took time. She took her time to map it out. And this movie is more magical because of the least amount of an explanation of everything we've reviewed so far. It's such a great point.
Yeah.
That's funny.
I will say this though, at least for the time travel.
Yeah.
At least it doesn't rely on Back to the Future rules of, you go back to the past, you change the present, change the future. When Gil goes back to the past, apparently it was always noted that he would be in the past because there is physical proof in Adriana's journal that he was there.
Yeah. Yeah. Also, that's one part of the movie that bothered me was he just happened to find her diary.
Oh yeah, no, that is insane.
That's a problem. That's a huge problem because she's not even, she's not, and she was a made up character. She actually was not a real character, a real person back in the 1920s. So if Woody Allen would have wrote him falling in love with an actual person from the 90s maybe a little bit more plausible that he finds a diary, because there would have been like multiple copies made because it was a famous person in the 20s. So like he finds a copy at a shop on the road in France, much more plausible. But the fact that this was a character that was made up from the 1920s and we're just supposed to believe, granted, when you're watching the movie, you don't know that. I guess if you do research, when you look later, it's like, okay, but so maybe for movie purposes, she was supposed to be like more famous potentially, but she isn't. So if we're meeting all these other actual like famous people in history, so it just doesn't. It's an immediate question that pops up. It's like, oh wait, he just finds her diary on the street corner in Paris and like reads about himself. Like, what the heck?
Yeah, no. Somehow that is the most implausible thing of this movie,
right?
Not the time travel.
Yeah.
It's
that's what I question. Yeah, I question the diary, not the time travel.
Right. No, I
so
agree.
Funny.
And if that happens, then you kind of messed up in the writing.
Right.
All right, Nick. I think that brings us to scoring.
Great.
So, as we teased before, we score our time travel movies a little bit differently. We're going to score this, of course, on the quality of the movie, but we're also going to score this on what we thought of the time travel mechanic and how well this movie fit in the category that we drafted it in. Or in this case, I drafted it in the time travel comedy category. So we're going to see how it did in that genre. So I'm going to go first for quality here, out of 5. So I think this movie is super fun. It's got some conveniences. It's not a perfectly neat bow, but overall, I can't help but just be so charmed by this movie. It's just fun and charming. It's not trying too hard to be anything else. I'm giving it a 4.
4 just overall for movie.
Yeah, 4 for just overall
Nice.
for movie.
Yeah, that's great. I think that's a little low, actually, for how much you like this movie. I'm surprised you went that low. Because I know you love this film. And I adore this film as well. I think it's like such a fun idea. What's great, too, is like, it's like time travel, romantic comedy, if you will. And it's like an hour and a half. They don't make movies like this anymore with that time, that, an hour and a half. Like, you get the full picture in such a short time. So, I don't know. For me, I'm going to go a little higher. I'm going to go with a 4.3. And
nice, I'll take it. Okay, so Nick, that brings us to time travel. We were just going over the mechanics. What do you think about the mechanic in this movie? Where's it score?
Well, so I think what helps is that they're not trying to explain it. And because they don't try to explain it, I almost want to give it a better score than some other movies that try to explain it, but just didn't do a good job. But I can't do that too much because, it's there's a lot left unsaid. And we essentially are leaving it up to believing in magic, which I'm okay with. But I think in the respect of the time travel draft, I'm going to give it a 3.5, which I think is generous. And it's because I really like this movie, but it's really not. Yeah, I think the mechanics are pretty bad. And honestly, I probably should have given it like a 1.5. Let's lock in a 2.8.
2.8.
Let's lock in a 2.8.
Okay, so I also think that even though our discussion, I think it helps this movie a lot in trying to define some of the mechanics of time travel in this movie, I don't think that you should have to make a lot of crazy leaps. Not that I think the Golden Age thinking is a crazy leap. I think that movie actually does demonstrate that is necessary. But it would be nice if it followed at least some of its own rules, which on the return home, there are no rules, apparently. You're just back, Which, that feels convenient, but, whatever. I'm actually going to go lower than you on this. It's my movie. I love it. I'm going to be harsh. 2.5.
All right. Respectable.
All right, that leaves us to the last category, which is how well it did in the genre that I, Joe Pedersen, drafted it in. Time travel comedy. I think this movie's hilarious. Yeah. I think, as far as time travel movies go, I can only think of a handful more that I find funnier than this movie. I don't think it's drop dead funny.
Yeah.
But it's silly, it's charming.
Yeah. silly.
Still is
Silly's
hilarious.
Yeah, silly's a better word than
It's silly.
it's
It's
silly.
a very silly movie.
It's silly. It fits in the category extremely well.
Yeah.
It's more of a comedy than romance.
Oh yeah.
But it's romantic.
Well, yeah.
It's romantic towards the golden ages of the characters that they prefer, right? That's where the romance is. The romance is in the golden age or in the past. It's not within necessarily.
Actually,
It is. He is in love with a character from the 1920s, so there is some romance there too.
You're making a pretty good argument here for maybe I should have drafted this in romance.
Yeah,
and
maybe.
I'm gonna regret doing this because you haven't given a score yet. We're gonna drop down. I was gonna give it a 4.8.
That would
comedy.
That's too high. Yeah.
I'm gonna drop down now to a 4.4.
Yeah.
Maybe
That's
a
better.
4.3.
Yeah,
I'm gonna go to 4.4.
You might be in the high
Because
30s.
you're right. I think there's a better argument for
There
romance here.
There is a better argument for romance. It's a silly movie. I don't know if it's. I would classify it more as a romance than a comedy, but it is funny and it is silly. Granted, and I picked Endgame as my comedy films, which we're not going to get into that again. But anyway, I'm going to give it a 3.9 for fitting in the category. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, that's yeah. All right, we're locked in. That does it for this particular time travel film for Midnight in Paris. But we've got more on the way. I believe I don't think we're doing time travel next. Are we doing Rings of Power next?
Yeah, so next up here on the podcast, Rings of Power comes out this week. And so that's going to be a weekly release. We're going to be on Threads talking about that a lot more. We'll definitely do one episode. We might do 2 episodes of the podcast about Rings of Power. It depends how the season shapes up. So that's probably the next thing we're going to do podcast-wise. We're definitely going to be talking about it online. So follow us on Threads. Hit the subscribe button. Follow us on Instagram as well. Of course, let us know what you think in the comments. And find us on your favorite podcast platform. And until next time.
May the review be with you. Peace.
Yeah.